Why does it always feel like you see the moon at the same point in its cycle? Usually, the first half of the lunar cycle, we notice the moon in the sky, but why don't we notice it during the second half? This is what we're going to look at in today's random astronomy question. We actually looked at the phases of the moon during our first video on this channel, but if you want a briefer version, here we go. As the moon is non-luminous and so doesn't produce its own light, the only way we see it from Earth is from light that will reflect from the sun off of the lunar surface and reaches through our atmosphere. Now, depending on where the moon is relative to the sun and the Earth, we see more or less of the moon illuminated. For example, when the moon is here in the first quarter, we see the right-hand side of the near side of the moon illuminated, but the left-hand side from the perspective of Earth is in shadow. If we move the moon a quarter of a cycle further on, then as long as it hasn't dipped into the Earth's shadow for a lunar eclipse, as it does with this model unfortunately, then it will be in full moon phase with all of the near side of the lunar surface lit up by the sun's light. Different phases are visible at different stages of the moon's orbit, as half of the moon is always illuminated, but we can only see the side that faces the Earth, leading to this changing amount of illumination. No. The times that the moon rises and sets to us as an observer depends on where in the lunar cycle we are. The time from one full moon through to the next is 29.5 days, but during this time the Earth is continually rotating. So we only see the moon if it is in the sky above us. If it falls below our horizon, then we cannot see it. As a result of this, and the different position of the moon at different phases, the moon will rise and set at differing times during the lunar cycle. When the moon is at first quarter, for example, it will rise above our horizon roughly in the middle of the day, setting in the middle of the night, and culminating, reaching the highest point in the sky, roughly halfway between these times, around dusk. But if we look at the moon in the third quarter, it would rise around midnight, set at midday, and culminate around 6 a.m. This shift in the moon rise and set times is about 50 minutes per day, looping every 29.5 days as the moon returns to its original phase. The moon is more easily observed when it is highest in the sky, so depending on when it culminates, along with the rising and setting times of the moon, you can be more likely to be looking at the sky when the moon culminates during certain phases of its cycle, and less likely to see it at other points. The distance between the moon and the sun in the sky can also be an important factor in whether we see the moon in the sky or not. For example, when the moon is near the new moon phase, it can be very close to the sun in the sky. This makes it extremely hard to see, as the sun is significantly brighter, meaning we don't see the moon until later in its cycle when there is a larger angle between it and the sun in the sky. Because of this, even though the moon is in the sky for much of the daytime when it is near the new moon phase, it is extremely rare to see it from Earth at this point, unless, of course, the tilt of the moon's orbit lines up just right and we get ourselves a solar eclipse. This obviously gives us a practical difficulty in terms of actually seeing particular phases of the moon, but there is another factor as well, which is common sense, but often not considered, And that factor is what times are we more or less likely to be looking up into the sky. Now, assuming people are keeping fairly regular hours, they will perhaps spot the moon if they are looking up in the sky at the morning when they get up or leave the house, probably won't look at the sky during much of the day, and then will be more likely to spot the moon during the late afternoon into the evening and beginning of night time. After that, most of us go to bed. So if we want to see certain phases of the moon, especially high in the sky, that means a very late night or an extremely early morning. When the moon is in the first half of its cycle after a new moon, it goes from being in the sky from sunrise to sunset through to rising in the evening and being visible for much of the night. After we pass the full moon phase, though, and the moon begins to wane, that means get smaller, the moon starts to rise much later in the evening, meaning that people often see much less of the moon during this phase in its cycle. This is particularly true if you live in an area where you have obstructions between yourself and the horizon. This will block your view of the moon when it is low in the sky, meaning you would only be able to see it when it is culminating at silly o'clock in the morning. Very technical time, that one. So that concludes our brief look at why we notice the moon more frequently at some points in its orbit than at others. If you have any theories as to why this may be, please do let us know down in those comments. Next time, we'll be looking at what the longest solar eclipse was and how that record has just been smashed. In the meantime, please do give us a like, join the over 100 people who've subscribed to the channel so far, and maybe take a look at one of our other videos tackling random questions from astronomy. And until next time, please continue to watch this space. Thank you.